Lisa, if you can hear me, can you please post the public participation?
I sure can, no problem at all.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Let's see, we need to share screen here.
Thanks. And
Yes.
I'm going to go ahead and get this committee meeting started. So we will call administration and finance to order. Posted, we have information regarding public participation in this virtual committee meeting. You can join this webinar, or you can also always leave us a voicemail for council. A number that you can call in for that is 552-6012. And if you cannot join by computer for this meeting, you can always call in to participate in the meeting. And those numbers are, let me see, where are they published?
Oops.
Hang on a minute. Number to call if you want to participate in the meeting, 253-215-8782. And the webinar ID is 828-4077-0884. And the password is 027222. So those are different ways to participate. And Lisa, do you want to do a roll call or would you like me to?
Yes, I certainly can. Let me just get to the right spot here. Stacy Anderson.
Present.
Okay. Mirtha Becerra.
Present.
John Contos.
He is not present.
Thank you. Heather Harp.
Present.
Jordan Hess.
Present.
Gwen Jones.
Present.
Julie Merritt.
Present.
Jesse Ramos.
Present.
Amber Sherrill.
Present.
Sandra Vasica.
Present.
Brian Von Losberg.
Present.
And Heidi West.
Here.
Okay, thank you so much.
Thank you. And we have minutes from the February 10th, 2021 meeting. Were there any changes to those minutes? Seeing none, those will stand approved. And I'm calling for public comment on items not on the agenda. I don't have anyone in the waiting room, so there's no one to give comment. So we're going to go forward with our one committee item today. We are having a presentation by Emily Harris Shears and Montana James on the Missoula Housing Policy Implementation Update. So this is, yes, lots of information, lots of great information for us to hear today. And Emily and Montana, are you in the meeting and able to speak?
We're here.
Excellent. Thank you. All righty.
All right. I will share my screen.
And Montana and Emily, do you want to take questions during the presentation as we go through, or do you want to wait until the end? What works best for you?
Yeah, I don't know if Emily, if you have thoughts, but I think it may be helpful to wait until the end. We've got a lot of information and we might cover or respond to questions as we go.
Okay.
So if council is
That's
okay with
fine.
that, we'll do that.
Like to everyone to know at the beginning. So if you have questions, counselors, just put a pin in them and we'll circle back after the presentation. And we have, gosh, we have until 3:15, but we might go a little bit long if we need to, because this is an important presentation. So if people have to peel off at that time, that's fine. Just wanted to let you know now. Okay, go ahead.
All right, thank you. So I'm Montana James, the Deputy Director for Community Development and Community Planning Development and Innovation at the city. And with me is Emily Harris Shears. She's our Affordable Housing Trust Fund Administrator in the Community Development Division. And we are happy to be here today to present this informational update to Council on our work so far on the housing policy implementation, and to provide a sense of where we're focusing in the next several months as that implementation work moves forward. So today we're going to touch on the housing needs that we're seeing in the community, the response to date, and kind of where we've focused our implementation efforts, what we'll be moving towards in the next several months, and then leave some time for questions. And with that, I'll turn it over to Emily.
Hi. So we're starting with the reality that we're all familiar with and want to center our conversation in why our office is focused on creating and preserving affordable homes in Missoula. Both renters and homeowners face challenges in the housing market, though different experiences and hardships. Renters face distinct challenges in the housing market, including a vacancy rate that has remained below the stability threshold of 5% in the last 5 years, going as low as 0.5% at various times in the year. In 2019, the median income for renters in Missoula was $37,538. Rents continue to raise year over year, a trend we see changing nationally. And it is estimated that 48% of renters in Missoula spend more than 30% of income on rent, making them cost burdened. And while the median home sale price continues to outpace wage increases year over year, home ownership continues to become out of reach for many Missoulians. And the COVID pandemic throughout 2020 and into this year has exacerbated existing trends in the local housing market. Job losses and layoffs put many Missoulians in a precarious position, many of whom are already spending large proportions of their income on housing and already making difficult decisions about budgeting for food, childcare, housing, and transportation. As household mobility slowed significantly during the pandemic, the rental vacancy rate in Missoula neared zero at times over the year, according to many estimates. The Sterling CRE report in September put it at 1.2. And the already low inventory of single-family homes continued to be a challenge as that residential mobility slowed. The combination of a low inventory and low interest rates throughout 2020 placed significant upward pressure on local home prices. And these same dynamics and impacts of the COVID pandemic are not just a Missoula problem. They're playing out all across the state of Montana. While we do have an adopted local policy and strategies in place, there are significant conversations that need to be had at the state level about how we manage our hot housing market statewide. These need to consider things like state and local revenue sources to support affordable housing, state level regulations that impede or slow down housing development, and how we can, as a state, leverage federal dollars, get them into our communities and not leave any money on the table.
So I think all of this data and this information that I'm sure we all see regularly nowadays adds more urgency to our continuing implementation of the citywide housing policy, A Place to Call Home. We saw in the 2018 gaps and needs analysis that led to the adopted policy similar dynamics. We saw that sales of home types under 200,000 decreased 40% from 2007 to 2016, and that the home ownership rate in Missoula was well below the statewide average. That entry-level detached homes were found to be unaffordable to Missoulians making under 100% of area median income, which represented at that time just over 50% of the population. And that in the cities, 41% of households were cost burdened. And we know that cost burden is centered disproportionately on renter households as well. So those challenges and opportunities identified in the gaps and needs analysis still resonate today. And the challenges that we faced in 2018 remain present. A key strategy from the housing policy as adopted in 2019 relates to tracking data and analyzing progress in order to adapt our goals and continue to improve the programs and target effectively. And really the primary function of that strategy is to understand the housing market and make those shifts as needed in our strategies. So right now we are working with a team of University of Montana researchers to provide an updated housing needs assessment that will give us some data insights on housing needs and trends, and that will feed directly into our annual Affordable Housing Trust Fund cycle and goal setting process. So Emily will speak a little bit more to how that annual cycle will function as related to the trust fund, but we anticipate having that initial baseline report in May. And I do want to take a moment to thank our community partners that also do research and are keeping an eye on the housing market. Good data is never easy to find as we might want it to be, especially in a non-disclosure state like Montana. But we are lucky in Missoula to have a lot of partners doing their own data collection and analysis. And I think their work will continue to contribute to our understanding of the market and all of the dynamics in the market at play as we move towards our regular city tracking process. So with that, I want to transition to quickly talking about what we've achieved to date in the housing policy implementation. One of our first priorities, really, as we looked at implementing the housing policy, was establishing the local Affordable Housing Trust Fund. This trust fund is key to implementation because it's really the backbone for many of the other programs and actions recommended in the policy. The trust fund is essential to everything from the Affordable Housing Incentives Program to low-income housing tax credit support programs, infrastructure support, and other kind of key policy items. We adopted the trust fund ordinance in June of last year, and Council fulfilled a funding request to seed the fund with $750,000 of general fund dollars in this fiscal year. That has really provided the important initial funding to make progress toward program development and create the careful infrastructure necessary to make sure that we have equitable and thoughtful administration of that local trust fund. Also related to aligning and leveraging funding sources, in January of last year, we convened a public-private housing finance work group to start tackling some of those key funding barriers that we identified during the policy development. That group met 4 times last year before COVID kind of hit in force, and I think made some really great recommendation and had some good conversations. And so in this year, we're planning to build on that progress and reconvene the group. In the realm of regulatory recommendations from the policy, we worked in 2019 and 2020 on incorporating the accessory dwelling unit code updates into Title 20. That code update was passed in October of last year, and we've also been doing some additional research into accessory dwelling units, participating in some convenings and national gatherings focused on understanding how to effectively use ADUs to contribute to affordable housing solutions. We'll continue to track ADUs in the community closely and work with the Development Services Division to understand their impact, as well as with leadership and that Citizen Oversight Committee of the Trust Fund to determine how to incentivize their use for long-term affordable housing stock. The city has also been working on a review of the townhome exemption subdivision regulations, and our team was closely involved in that work. The final report related to that project was presented to Council in November of last year, and we're staying involved as that project turns toward implementation planning. And the key point there is that many of the recommendations in that report further our housing policy goals and some of the housing policy recommendations related to land use and code. We've also been engaged in the Swetapkane, or formerly the Mullen Area Master Planning process, which has presented a unique opportunity to really think about housing affordability in a master planned community as well. So during all of this work, we've continued to really rely on our community partners to promote access to affordable housing through financial, renter, and home buyer education and counseling. And Homeward is the local entity that we've funded the past several years with our federal funds to offer those services. And to date, since the housing policy was adopted, has served almost 1,500 Missoulians through those programs, getting us closer to our goal there. Another key element of the housing policy strategies is really collaborating with community organizations, land trusts, and developers to create and preserve affordable homes in Missoula. The policy speaks to the value of land banking, high opportunity land, when possible, to achieve both a higher production of affordable housing units or homes, and to integrate innovative development techniques that achieve goals around mix of unit types, all while incorporating those developments into the existing neighborhood context. So banking parcels in high opportunity districts allows us to achieve a number of city goals, not just related to housing affordability, but also environmental cleanup, transit and transportation, and some energy conservation goals as well. And I think the Scott Street parcel project, which was recently presented to council, is an excellent example of this concept. And that parcel alone will bring 70 permanently affordable homeownership opportunities to Missoula, in addition to more rental homes, badly needed community space, and assets like daycare facilities, all while meeting neighborhood level goals as well. In addition to banking land to meet our housing needs, we've also in the last year and a half, been able to leverage our federal funds through the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development to build a strong pipeline of affordable homes. Through two separate projects, the Scott Street one that I mentioned and another one, we will see 77 permanently affordable homeownership opportunities hit the market in the next 2 years, offering homes that Missoulians making up to 120% of area median income can afford. Between the Villaggio and the Trinity projects, we'll see 438 new rental homes come into the Missoula market in the next few years that will serve Missoulians making up to 60% of area median income. And we're also making progress on a single family homeowner-occupied rehab program in partnership with the Human Resource Council that has worked out, I think, a lot of kinks over the last year or so in using federal funds for this type of activity. And we're anticipating that it will process several more loans by the end of this fiscal year. And I want to note that while we refer to these units in terms of pipeline, I want to stress that these are homes that have been funded already. They have financing packages together and they will be built. They're not just envisioned or planned, that they will be on the ground in the next 2 to 3 years. So we want to talk now about how we plan to build on this work that's already been done and kind of where we need to go next with our policy implementation efforts. So I will turn it over to Emily to touch on those things.
In the coming months, we'll continue to implement new elements of the housing policy recommendations, including piloting the funding cycle for the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, developing the Affordable Housing Incentives Program, reconvening the Public-Private Housing Finance Work Group, and continuing to track and report. And the Affordable Housing Trust Fund was seeded with an initial $750,000 of general fund investment in fiscal year 2021. And the sale of the Scott Street parcel will bring the total fund available to grant and loan to around $2.4 million. And while we call funds like tax increment fund financing, community development block grant, and home leverage, I want to note that it's important to remember that these are directly funding millions of dollars of investment in the community right now. And these funds, the funds from these sources will not be a part of the package of funds that will be granted or loaned directly from the trust fund, but they are funding projects that align to the goals of the housing policy, They further projects that align to the trust fund, and they stretch our capacity to reach our community objectives, hence the distinction of leverage. So we have a lot of work ahead of us with the Affordable Housing Trust Fund, as you can see here. And I'm going to take some time and unpack all of this with you, but it's imperative that we take our time to build a strong infrastructure for the Housing Trust Fund to support its healthy ongoing operation. We're centering our approach in the principles of the housing policies of diversity, innovation, collaboration, and achievability. We're focused on implementing key components of the trust fund this year, which includes seating the oversight committee, adopting the administrative policies, and approving the allocation plan in the fall. Once the functional components of the trust fund are established, we'll be ready to run a competitive grant-making cycle and begin disbursements, fund disbursements in spring of 2022. And throughout implementation, we'll continue to reflect the value of intentional community engagement, seek opportunities to ask for perspective and guidance, and share updates on our progress toward our goals. The Oversight Committee was a priority for the community and City Council as we crafted the trust fund ordinance, and has remained a focus in implementation, as it will help us to develop policies, priorities, and approaches that reflect a broad range of perspectives and expertise. We've been intentional about our goals of seating a committee that is diverse and reflective of Missoula in race, economic experience, and housing need and experiences. We approached achieving this through developing a work group to create the application materials, to being explicit about who we're recruiting in those materials, and also targeted outreach to communities that have been underrepresented on committees and boards. We hope that this targeted approach will produce a committee with representative voices and perspectives to reflect the diverse housing needs of Missoulians. The administrative policies and procedures will enable us to be intentional about how we will address specific needs in our community and clarify the intentions of the uses of the trust fund. And by aligning the trust fund cycle with our current HUD funding cycle through a unified application, this will allow us to leverage available funding sources and invest strategically, increasing the impact of the projects we support, and also streamlining the process for the organizations that we fund. It's also important to note that the planning for the unified application will streamline grant making and the application process in 2022 and after, but the home and CDBG grant making round is open now and is not impacted by trust fund planning this year. So our next regulatory recommendation from the housing policy that we're prioritizing is formalizing the Affordable Housing Incentive Program as recommended in the policy. And the purpose of the incentives program is to partner with those building homes in our community to encourage development of below market homes to meet the great need we know exists there. We set some of the groundwork for this program in Title 20 updates in 2020 by clarifying and unifying our definition of affordable housing in code. And this year we'll work to formalize the rest of the program in code and administrative guides. Our primary focus of the Affordable Housing Incentives Program is to increase opportunities for both rental housing and homeownership. But this incentive program will also allow us to test the model of voluntary incentives and build a groundwork for other incentive related programs, such as accessory dwelling units. And we plan to reconvene the public-private finance work group with goals around expanding CDFI products available, expanding access to ADU financing, developing new preservation financing tools, and increasing community awareness and access to housing services. And finally, there are many opportunities tracking and reporting changes in the market that impact our overall goals, including tracking affordable rental properties that are nearing the end of their period of affordability, so we're able to preserve them from flipping to market rate. Supporting state level advocacy for low income housing tax credits, including advocating for a more transparent award process. And of course, this year with the legislative session, this involves closely tracking bills related to housing and advocating where possible in support or opposition to key bills that affect our ability to solve our housing challenges at the local level. And then also, as Montana mentioned, developing an annual housing report, which we will use to communicate housing trends and outcomes of city-funded projects. And this will also help us with our annual allocation planning for the trust fund.
So that that is a quick, or maybe not quick enough, recap, and we're happy to answer questions. I saw some hands go up.
Tons of information, and I really appreciate that. And I was thinking as I was sitting here listening, every once in a while I'll have a constituent conversation and they're in a very frustrated place and they want to know why we haven't done anything, what are we doing? And it's never a simple answer. And I think the complexity of your presentation today goes to that. It's a complicated answer and we're working on it, but it's also hard to make a big dent in it right away. So we had some questions. I have Julie Merritt.
Thank you guys, first of all, for the presentation and for getting it on the website. I think it'll provide some great links to just what Gwen was talking about, is giving people a place to go to look at, to see some of the stuff that we are working on. I think we're doing a great job of meeting some of the goals around developing both ownership and rental properties that are affordable. I think there was just one maybe typo in the slide about getting the applications online for the affordable housing. I think it said that they'd be available in winter of 2022. And I think you meant the grant application would be prepared this winter for 2021. Is that, do I have that right?
The timing, I know our fiscal year, calendar year, it gets confusing. But the goal, so currently right now we have our CDBG and home application process underway. And the goal is through this next calendar year to really work with that citizen oversight committee to develop those administrative policies and some of those key documents that have to happen first. And then next year at this time, we will have the full unified application up for both trust fund dollars and the federal funds. Does that answer the question?
Great, thank you. Ms. Anderson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thanks so much for this great presentation. So much good information. And I know we're running short on time, but what I kept coming to mind throughout this presentation was the fact that Missoula is not an island all unto itself. And the money that we allocated in this last budget and the investments that we are making in the creative, things that we are doing at the city needs to also be matched at the the state level and the federal level. And in none of these presentations, we kind of really address that. I mean, I feel like we're constantly bailing water and the ship is just still filling. And even though we're doing significant things, that is not being matched by our partners at the state and federal level. And I know this legislative session isn't necessarily looking like there are good things coming out of that. So I guess I just want to put that out there. I would be curious the next time we have this update, if you guys could shed a little bit more light on that, because I think that as we are out in the community, and this is an issue that we hear a lot about and we talk a lot about, it's, trying to highlight the fact that what we're doing is not being matched by our other partners. And so it's really like, we can't do it ourselves. We can't Affordable Housing Trust Fund our way out of this problem. We can't regulate. We need to have that partnership in other entities because we are a city within a state, within a country. So that's just being said for future. But I also have questions in regard, my question is in regards to the leverage with TIF funding I think it would be once again helpful to highlight how it is that how is that being utilized. I don't think people understand what it just means to leverage. Like, I think it would be helpful to have some examples so that you could see that it's not just turning around those dollars and granting them out, that they're kind of like aligning, for example, the Scott Street project, we were able to purchase some of that with TIF money, but now we are, that alignment there to expand upon that, because I know at this legislature there is bills, sort of hoping to curtail TIF, and that would then ultimately roll down to us and curtail our ability to continue to address this issue. And I don't think a lot of people realize that correlation. So if you could just kind of, I guess it's a hard question to answer in a simple, with only a few minutes left, but just kind of as we continue to work on this, as you continue to put presentation out, I'd appreciate more kind of for that to be built out and explained as available. So thank you so much.
That was a long question. I just want that noted for the record. All good. It's a very interesting issue, and I don't think it's a question you can answer today, but I think it's an issue that you want us to start chewing on. Correct, Ms. Anderson? Thank you. Okay, I want to say that we are technically past time, but I'm hoping that Emily and Montana can stay for a bit and continue to answer questions. And I understand if people have to exit the meeting, but we're going to just go forward here. Ms. Cheryl.
Thanks. And I do appreciate Stacy's point is being a city and a state and a country and what that means for funding and how important those issues are. And to Gwen's point, I have constituents asking me all the time, like, what have you done about affordable housing? And, it's not a very clear answer. And this is a great presentation to show the complexity of it, because we're not just going to stop the trajectory. I mean, that's not something that we have the power or the tools to do. So, I just appreciate the outlining of the different partnerships and the different goals, and we're making some really serious progress toward it. So thank you, and thanks for your work on it. I mean, I think I'm going to share this with the people when they ask. So my question, those are my comments. My question is, you had shown, I'm just curious, you'd shown a vacancy rate for the last quarter of 20. Do you have any comparison for 19? I know we're going in that direction, but I'm curious maybe if there's a comparison that would show COVID's negative effect on that.
Yeah, I think we can definitely pull that. I don't know, Emily, if you have that off the top of your head. We largely rely on partners like Sterling CRE to produce those numbers, but we can go back and pull some comparisons and send them to you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Harp.
Thanks for the presentation. I think this is really important stuff. I wanted to just kind of touch on the 5-year goals, where it seems like we are really making some pretty good strides towards achieving those goals. But I think it is really worth pointing out that 100 units for over 5 years is a drop in the bucket of what our need actually is. Each of our wards has 5,000 households in and of itself. So it's incremental at best. So along those lines, what I'd like you to address perhaps at our next meeting is really, how do you plan to incentivize permanent affordability, both in the rental as well as the home ownership realms? Because we know inclusionary zoning, which is one form of shared equity, our state legislature has pretty much cut us off at the knees of ever pursuing that as a stick version. So how do we do that with a carrot? And that I would like to hear from you next time.
Great, thanks. Brian.
Thanks. Thanks a lot, Montana and Emily. I appreciate the work on this. And Montana, this is what happens when I'm not operating a full night of sleep. Remind me if I'm remembering this correct, or correct me if I got it wrong. I think we talked about doing an update like this now, sort of early in the calendar year. We'll get another update sort of as part of the budget process. And then I think we had talked about then doing one in the fall again. So sort of 3 during the year. And I see you shaking your head.
Yeah.
So I think I'm remembering that correctly.
Right.
So I wanted everyone to be aware that this was sort of intentional to set up sort of a regular process for touching base on the policy and progress and opportunities, challenges, etc. I am sure you were planning to do this, but just I have used the material on the Engage Missoula website frequently for constituent communications, and I really appreciate you all really setting the example, I think, in the city staff for keeping information there updated. So if we could get this presentation uploaded to Engage Missoula, which I'm sure you were already planning to do. And then the last thing, I think just a thought for going forward. I really like, and I know we had previewed some of this together. I appreciate how you presented the funding in the Affordable Housing Trust Fund and then the leverage dollars. I think there might be an opportunity there. I was thinking about, particularly because of my involvement in the CDBG scoring and award function, we might want to add some of the words that you said out loud about the Villaggio project, for instance, and Trinity. They'd lend themselves, frankly, to maybe, a rendering and I always like maps for these projects to be able to think about where these sort of are in the community, and then the amount, because as I was thinking about the Villaggio, for example, we're investing, a sizable amount of money in that. Where obviously it's not a city project. We're doing this in partnership with the Housing Authority, and it's a big complex project. So, but I think it would be valuable to represent those projects both graphically and with this, maybe the city's investment, which I think is in that leverage component there. And then I think the units we were representing in the table at the end, but maybe just spelling that out a bit more on some of those partnerships might just help all of us council members and public understand that better. But I really like how you presented it so far.
Thanks. Ms. Becerra.
Thanks. To quote the mayor, I feel like, we're building the plane as we're flying it when it comes to a lot of issues, and certainly affordable housing is one of those. So I truly appreciate all the work that has been put into getting us to where we are right now. And even though, it might be a drop in the bucket when it comes to the efforts that have been put in, I truly appreciate those drops because it's significantly more than what we perhaps anticipated we could do. So I'm really appreciative of all the efforts. Because a lot of what we can and cannot do depends on what happens at the state legislature. I wonder if you could provide what bills you're tracking and what the legislature is doing to help further our efforts or not. I think it'd be important for the public to also know that a lot of what happens in Helena has the ripple effects of what happens there in our community. So, I would like to know, what are the bills that you're tracking? What can we do? What can the community do in terms of, participating in the legislative process, perhaps to help our efforts here? So just having access to what it is that you're tracking and how we and the rest of the community can help would be interesting to me. Thanks.
Yeah, and I know that we have a regularly updated report on the website of all of the city's bills, but I'd be happy to pull out some housing bills specifically for council.
That would be great. It's such a a vast thing to try and track, and I think it's super helpful if you guys are really leaning in on those issues. If you could provide that to council, we'd really appreciate it. We don't have any more questions. I did just want to make one comment, which first of all, this is great information, and it's hard to communicate this kind of information, and you really did it well in your presentation. So thank you so much.
Gwen, I do see Heidi's hand up. I don't know if you saw it.
Well, Heidi, I am so sorry. My cursor was covering you. Heidi.
That's okay. This was a great presentation. Thank you for all the, I know, hard work that went into it. I just had one more suggestion. I think with the Trinity project, there were the public works dollars that are going into the project, you know, in the form of that sidewalk project. And I think as hopefully we see more of those where public works dollars are being aligned with affordable housing, I think that might be a category that would be worth adding, maybe not at this point, but as a match, maybe as those accumulate, just to kind of track what other pots of money that the city is allocating are contributing to affordable housing.
Great, thanks. Okay, seeing no other hands up, I just wanted to comment.
Does he need help?
Briefly that I think I mean, when I look back through city documents on different plans, we've been talking about affordable housing for decades. And I think in the last 5 to 8 years, it really heated up after the 2008 recession. And a few years ago, the city pivoted and created this department to really work on these issues and to create a housing policy. But I just want to remind ourselves that we have a great housing policy with a lot of good goals, and we've got good people implementing it, and we're working on it. And then the pandemic hit, and a very difficult problem became exponentially more difficult. And I don't think we're going to have any clarity. The dust isn't going to settle, I don't know, another 6, 12, 18 months. So I think so great. We have to keep working forward on it. I don't know if our analysis has to change or not, because we're still in this time of flux. And I just want to take note of that, because our numbers are really dramatically going up in terms of expenses to live in this town. And it's very distressing, and it causes a lot of stress for people, but we kind of have to ride this out, see where we ultimately land. And we have tools in place, and then we push harder on those tools, and we work harder, and we figure it out. But I'm glad we have these tools in place. I'm glad we have good people working on it. And anyway, just wanted to remind ourselves that we're still in the middle of this maelstrom, and it's kind of crazy. So we just have to keep it in mind. Any other comments by anyone? Or Montana, Emily, anything else to add? Great. Well, thank you for indulging me and letting us go long. We went about 15 minutes over, but I think it was really good to have a good discussion on this. And thanks for all of your work, Emily and Montana, and we will see you in a few months. All right. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
And we will be adjourned.